The battle over the last 3 light orbs above the lake ended in just a few minutes. But the intensity of the confrontation was enough to make even Chen, the observer, feel his eyelids twitch with tension. The TO compete for the remaining 3 orbs. The top powerhouses from all factions threw everything into the fight. Their clashes shattered the very space around them. Had it not been for the extraordinary nature of this stone island, it would likely have been completely destroyed by now. In the end, the 3 orbs fell into the hands of the 3 top forces, the Divine Pavilion, the Netherworld Palace, and the 10,000 Saints Mountain. Of course, this wasn't to say the other top forces were weaker. In such a chaotic battle, with each side holding each other in check, it was all down to luck. These 3 factions just happened to make the right moves at the right time. Once the orbs were in their hands, the experts of the Divine Pavilion, Netherworld Palace, and 10,000 Saints Mountain immediately took them out, and as expected, inside were 3 crystal-clear jade vials. Engraved on these jade vials were ancient and mysterious runes, clearly identifying them as the very item they most needed at this moment. With the jade vials in hand, the 3 factions quickly activated them amidst envious gazes from all around. The vials tilted, and light radiated from them, causing a powerful suction force to emerge. Waves of lake water surged upward, continuously flowing into the vials, where faint golden light flickered, and a terrifying spiritual energy fluctuation gradually began to concentrate. This scene left the 3 factions, especially the Divine Pavilion, greatly pleased. These jade vials were far superior to the previous items they had obtained for refining. The 4 pavilion masters of the Divine Pavilion breathed a quiet sigh of relief, but their eyes, as they looked at Chen, still carried a hint of unwillingness. The reason was clear. The earthen jar in Chen's hands, which was about the size of a wash basin, was absorbing lake water and refining the spiritual divine liquid at a much faster rate than their vials. Damned brat! The 4 pavilion masters gritted their teeth in anger, clearly furious that Chen had taken the biggest advantage of all. However, at this moment, they refrained from taking further action. Chen was surrounded by a stone army, and the 3 emperors of the Great Luo Heaven Domain were nearby, offering protection. Even if they went all out, it would be pointless, given the situation. It was better to focus on activating their jade vials and absorb more lake water, hoping to refine a large amount of spiritual divine liquid. Crash. The once chaotic battle above the lake had now completely calmed down. All killing intent was suppressed, and each faction took up a corner, safeguarding their refining items while desperately absorbing the lake water on the stone island. There was no sound of battle, only the crisp sound of flowing water filling the air. However, while the fighting on the stone island had gradually subsided, outside the island, spiritual energy surged, and space itself shattered under the relentless spiritual shockwaves. These shockwaves came from the battle between the 7 Earth Supremes, led by Mandala, and the 4th Hall Master's spirit puppet. Boom! A spiritual energy rainbow, like a giant crystal, pierced the sky, carrying the force to destroy everything in its path. In front of it, a small figure could be seen. Mandala. She gazed at the terrifying attack coming her way, her expression slightly tense. What had started as a defensive spirit puppet had now taken the initiative to strike, and the force behind its attacks had grown increasingly terrifying. Even someone of her strength was beginning to feel some apprehension. Boom! Golden light surged from Mandala's golden eyes as she struck out with her delicate white hand. The seemingly weak palm caused the very space around it to shatter into fragments before clashing directly with the massive crystal rainbow, which was thousands of feet long. The shockwave exploded, sending Mandala stumbling backward. The crystal rainbow shattered, breaking into countless light spots that scattered into the air. While Mandala resisted this onslaught, the other 6 Earth Supremes also used their techniques to shatter the incoming attacks. Each of them had a serious expression, clearly realizing that the spirit puppet's offensive had grown stronger. In the center of their formation, the 4th Hall Master's spirit puppet stood with hollow eyes that seemed to glow. It lowered its head, casting a glance at the stone island. A low growl rumbled from its throat, and terrifying spiritual energy erupted from its body, forming a series of dazzling crystal-like rings behind it. Mandala and the other 6 looked at the spirit puppet, whose spiritual energy fluctuations were rapidly rising, their expressions shifting slightly. It seems they've found the spiritual divine liquid. The Lord of the Divine Pavilion's gaze flickered. The change in the spirit puppet was clearly due to the events happening on the stone island. The other leaders' expressions also changed, and a flicker of joy appeared in their eyes. But it quickly turned to suspicion, as they were unsure who had obtained the divine spirit liquid at that moment. Whoosh! As their thoughts raced, they saw the spirit puppet rapidly descending, clearly intending to land on Stone Island. It wants to guard the divine spirit liquid. Stop it! Mandala called out sharply. With a single strike, she sent a palm through the air, releasing a powerful spiritual imprint. Underneath it, wind and rain converged. The rain could pierce through space, and the wind could tear apart the world. The force of this strike was terrifying. Boom! Mandala's divine palm sent the spirit puppet flying back. At the same time, several other Earth Supremes joined forces and launched a fierce attack. Their overwhelming assault trapped the spirit puppet, preventing it from reaching Stone Island to guard the divine spirit liquid. The spirit puppet, entangled by Mandala and the others, let out low growls. The terrifying spiritual energy swept out, forcing Mandala and the others to proceed with great caution. A mere spirit puppet, does it truly think it can stop us? At this moment, a cold voice suddenly rang out. Mandala and the others were momentarily stunned as they saw the Lord of the Divine Pavilion suddenly shoot down and directly appear in front of the spirit puppet, slapping out with a mighty hand. The sudden change took Mandala and the others by surprise. They quickly exchanged confused glances. During their earlier encounters with the spirit puppet, they had realized its strength. If it were a one-on-one fight, none of them could easily overpower it. That's why they had chosen to fight together. But now, the Lord of the Divine Pavilion seemed to have lost his mind, risking everything in such a reckless move. Boom! As the Lord of the Divine Pavilion slammed his palm down, 5-colored divine light exploded from his palm, lighting up the heavens and earth. The power was terrifying. Roar! The spirit puppet let out a roar. Light seemed to burst from its hollow eyes, and it too swung its palm outward. At the moment of impact, rings of light, almost crystalline in nature, gathered around it. Mandala and the others narrowed their eyes, unable to hide their surprise. They realized they could launch a joint attack and suppress the spirit puppet, but, for some reason, none of them moved. Here, they were all competitors, and the Lord of the Divine Pavilion was the strongest. If they could use the spirit puppet to weaken his combat power, it would benefit the others. Bang! The two palm strikes collided heavily, sending a shockwave rippling through the air. Within tens of thousands of zhong, the space shattered, and even the ocean beneath seemed to be cut in two, creating a deep chasm. The shockwave ravaged the area, and the fourth hall master's spirit puppet was sent flying, a crack appearing on its arm as if it were about to shatter, clearly injured. On the other hand, the Lord of the Divine Pavilion was also in bad shape. Blood appeared at the corner of his mouth, and his body shot out like a cannonball, eventually crashing into the sea below with a loud splash, sinking deep into the ocean. Mandala and the others watched from above, their lips twitching. They couldn't understand why the usually calm and calculating Lord of the Divine Pavilion had suddenly become so reckless. This direct confrontation had injured the spirit puppet, but the Lord himself was also seriously wounded, which would be detrimental to the future battles. It seems the Lord of the Divine Pavilion has been blinded by the divine spirit liquid. The old serpent ghost of the serpent god temple chuckled, taking pleasure in the situation. The other Earth Supremes exchanged glances. Enough, don't worry about him. Let's continue holding the spirit puppet off so that those on the island have enough time to acquire the divine spirit liquid, Mandala said calmly. The Earth Supremes nodded in agreement. At this point, they had no interest in the Lord of the Divine Pavilion's injuries. Besides, as their rivals, the more wounded he was, the better for them. So, the 6 of them once again united to restrain the 4th Hall Master's spirit puppet. Having witnessed its power firsthand, they were even more cautious and dared not approach the spirit puppet as recklessly as the Lord of the Divine Pavilion had done. As for the Lord of the Divine Pavilion, who had yet to appear after half a day, Mandala and the others did not mind that it seemed that this person had suffered a setback and was likely hiding beneath the sea, recovering from his injuries, fearing that if the divine spirit liquid appeared, he would be in no condition to compete for it. Boom, boom, above Stone Island. Violent and terrifying waves of spiritual energy surged once again. The spirit puppet could not move far away, and thus could only defend against Mandala and the others' ranged attacks. However, from its increasingly agitated state, Mandala and the others knew that the divine spirit liquid inside the island had likely already started to find its rightful owner. While they were fully engaged in restraining the spirit puppet, none of them noticed that deep beneath the sea, in the greenish waters, a faint black mist was slowly spreading that it looked as though a demon god was about to awaken at the bottom of the ocean. Splash, splash, in the enormous lake, streams of water shot up into the sky. These water streams were a bright emerald green and thick as syrup. Upon closer inspection, one could even see that the water contained broken crystals, products of spiritual energy compressed to an extraordinarily terrifying degree. This lake was the transformed essence of the fourth Hall Master's lifetime of spiritual energy after his fall. Even the vast, boundless ocean surrounding it was derived from this lake. Originally, given the highly condensed essence of spiritual energy, even a ninth grade supreme would not dare to absorb it easily. The spiritual energy refined by Earth Supremes was too powerful. If absorbed into the body, it could easily erode the person's own spiritual energy, causing more harm than good. However, now, this spiritual energy essence, which even the ninth grade supremes feared, was continuously surging upward, eventually being drawn into various peculiar vials and jars. Chen stood within the protective circle of the stone army. An ancient clay jar floated before him, and a massive water column, hundreds of feet tall, was forcibly drawn in, like a giant whale drinking water, sucked into the seemingly small but bottomless jar. The speed at which this ancient clay jar absorbed the water far exceeded all the other vessels. If efficiency were measured, even the jade vase, which the divine pavilion later took, would pale in comparison. Its absorption rate was not even 1/10 that of Chen's jar. Thus, whenever the other force's eyes drifted toward him, and they saw the grand water column before Chen, their eyes inevitably turned a shade of red. The spiritual energy essence in this lake was not limitless, that it had its limits. And with so many people fighting to absorb it, at this rate, it wouldn't be long before the lake would be completely depleted at that time. The divine spirit liquid that Chen condensed would undoubtedly be the most perfect. The divine spirit liquid was crucial to whether the leaders of the various forces could break through. This was of paramount importance, because no matter how fiercely they fought, it wouldn't affect the overall situation. What truly had the potential to shake the foundation of a top-tier force was one thing: breaking its pillar, and clearly, the leaders of each force were those pillars. If the Lord of the Divine Pavilion could use this opportunity to break through to an Upper Earth Supreme, Chen and the others understood that the balance of the entire northern domain would change. Previously, they had some doubts about the difference between these levels, thinking it might not be as terrifying as it seemed. After all, of the 7 Earth Supremes, the Lord of the Divine Pavilion was the closest to an Upper Earth Supreme. But even so, he wouldn't claim he had absolute confidence in defeating another Lower Earth Supreme. However, if he broke through to an Upper Earth Supreme, the situation would be completely different. This was clear from how the Fourth Hall Master, using a spirit puppet that inherited his power, managed to block all 7 Earth Supremes from approaching. An Upper Earth Supreme was enough to disrupt the existing balance in the northern domain. The crisp sound of flowing water echoed through the quiet stone island. The powerful warriors from all forces subtly exchanged glances, their thoughts racing. The grand hunting war had reached its final stages, but the true danger had only just begun, because the final outcome was something no one could predict. As time passed rapidly, the sun was already half set, and the lake's water continued to thin out, signaling that the spiritual energy essence was almost depleted. As the lake water grew more and more diluted, a terrifying fluctuation of spiritual energy began to emanate from above the lake. The source of these fluctuations was none other than the strange bottles and jars. The divine spirit liquid has successfully condensed. Suddenly, a voice filled with joy rang out. Strong individuals from all factions quickly looked up, and in the Divine Hall's camp, a jade vial that had originally been tilting slowly ceased drawing in the lake watered to the mouth of the vial. A faint golden light burst forth, roaring into the sky, turning the heavens into a golden an incredibly terrifying fluctuation of spiritual energy rippled outward, and even the 4 pavilion masters of the Divine Hall felt a sense of pressure, causing them to inwardly click their tongues, buzz. At the same time the Divine Hall reacted, other factions also erupted in joyous shouts. Golden lights surged, filling the sky, though it did not belong to the Divine Hall's side. It was the Netherworld Palace and 10,000 Saints Mountain, who, using the power of their jade vials, had also successfully condensed a potent divine spirit liquid. Following them, more bursts of golden light appeared, signaling that other artifacts had also condensed divine spirit liquid. However, the brilliance from these was far inferior to the divine spirit liquid produced by the 3 jade vials. Finally, it's done. The 4 pavilion masters of the Divine Hall watched the scene with smiles on their faces, feeling relieved as if a heavy burden had been lifted. After all their hard work, they had finally managed to secure the divine spirit liquid. That kid still hasn't made a move. The Southern Pavilion Master suddenly turned his gaze toward Mu Chen's direction. At the moment, Mu Chen's side was the only one without any sign of divine spirit liquid forming. If he fails, all the better. Once the Pavilion Master breaks through, we must expel the Great Luo Heaven Domain from the Northern Domain. At that point, they will all be like lost dogs. The other 3 Pavilion Masters also showed cold, sinister expressions at this moment. All other factions' forces involuntarily directed their gazes toward Mu Chen's position. After all, the ancient earthen jar he had obtained was incredibly powerful. It had absorbed the most spiritual essence, but now, it seemed that it had absorbed too much, which could lead to some risks. Not far away, the Sleeping King, Heavenly Vulture Emperor, Netherworld Prince, and others exchanged glances, their eyes flickering with nervousness. The divine spirit liquid was far too important for the Great Luo Heaven Domain. Despite the countless gazes from all directions, Mu Chen remained calm. His eyes were fixed on the ancient earthen jar in front of him, which continued to draw in the spiritual essence from the lake below. However, the lake was now nearly drained. The last bit of thick water shot up into the sky, before finally being absorbed into the earthen jar. Once the last trace of lake water was drawn in, the ancient earthen jar fell into a sudden silence, showing no further signs of movement. Seeing this, the 4 pavilion masters of the Divine Hall immediately showed ecstatic expressions. Could it be that he really failed? What a fool! Boom! But just as they were rejoicing in their hearts, a thunderous sound suddenly exploded from the heavens and earth. Many experts jumped in surprise, hastily looking up, only to see the once quiet ancient earthen jar in front of Mu Chen suddenly erupt with golden lightning, splitting the sky like a golden dragon, radiating terrifying pressure. The golden lightning surged out, continuously tearing through the heavens. Looking closer, the golden light inside the jar was wildly gathering, and golden mist swirled within. In that mist, one could vaguely see a golden embryo-like object lightly twitching. Boom! The twitch was subtle, but when the faint sound of it echoed, the entire sky seemed to tremble along with it. All the surrounding experts were left dumbfounded, their eyes filled with envy and jealousy. Even a fool could tell that the divine spirit liquid Mu Chen had condensed was extraordinary. The cold smiles on the faces of the 4 pavilion masters of the Divine Hall had already frozen, replaced by a deep, livid expression. They stared at Mu Chen with eyes full of hatred, wishing they could tear him into pieces. Whoosh! The 3 emperors of the Great Luo Heaven Domain shot forward, piercing through the stone army and appearing around Mu Chen. Their powerful spiritual energy exploded, forming a protective shield around him. They were clearly aware of how powerful Mu Chen's divine spirit liquid was, so they quickly acted to protect him, lest someone succumb to jealousy and make a rash move. Mu Chen exhaled a sigh of relief. He extended his hand, grasping the ancient clay pot. After so much hardship, he had finally managed to refine the divine spirit liquid. Bang! As the pot fell from his hand, the stone soldiers around Mu Chun immediately shattered, turning into countless light points that dispersed into the air. Clearly, the battle-intent divine disc had reached its limit and could no longer support them. Mu Chun looked down at the empty stone disc in his hand, no longer holding any stone statues. He sighed, a little regretful. Hee, Mu Chun, you've done a great service this time. Once it's over, the domain master will reward you. It won't just be a battle-intent divine disc, said the sleeping king with a smile. Mu Chun smiled in return, not particularly concerned about any reward. When he came to the northern domain, the great Luo heaven domain had given him much protection, and Mandala had also provided him with valuable guidance. That was why he had wholeheartedly helped in the pursuit of the divine spirit liquid. As for rewards, he was not as eager as other kings. Let's go. Hand the divine spirit liquid over to the domain master. The sleeping king exchanged glances with the others, then clenched his fist. A jade seal flashed into existence, which they immediately crushed. It was a signal to notify Mandala that the task had been completed. At the same time, other forces began to take out their communication items, and a moment later, light flared everywhere. Not long after they crushed the communication items, the light barrier above Stone Island started to tremble, and cracks quietly appeared. Prepare to move, the sleeping king ordered as he gathered the many powerful figures of the great Luo heaven domain. Mu Chun looked up at the cracks that were slowly appearing, took a deep breath, and tightened his grip on the clay pot. The divine spirit liquid was now in hand. He just didn't know if Mandala could use it to break through. The grand hunting war had finally reached its most critical moment. Above the boundless sea, Stone Island floated, surrounded by a thick light barrier that completely concealed the island from outside view. At that moment, this seemingly impenetrable light barrier began to ripple, and a crack rapidly spread across its surface. This crack was the result of the combined efforts of Mandala and the other 5 Earth Supremes. After receiving reports from their subordinates, they immediately joined forces to tear open the barrier again. This time, instead of each of them tearing open separate cracks, they worked together to tear open the same spot, which naturally made it much easier than before. Whoosh! As the crack appeared, the movement began. Light shadows shot out from within the barrier at lightning speed. Boom! As the light shadows shot out, the spirit puppet above the light barrier roared in anger. Its hollow eyes radiated terrifying pressure as it scanned the light shadows, clearly sensing the fluctuations of its own spiritual essence. Bang! Before the spirit puppet could act, the 6 Earth Supremes had already made their move. 6 massive palm prints, as large as mountains, descended from the sky, slamming heavily into the spirit puppet's body. At the same time, the 6 Earth Supremes waved their sleeves, and a streak of spiritual light swept across the sky, piercing through the void. Each of them gathered their forces, then retreated at lightning speed. In just a few breaths, their forces retreated several thousand zhong, protected by their leaders. As they retreated, the spirit puppet, bound by its duty to guard Stone Island, did not pursue. Instead, it glared angrily at the retreating light shadows. Suddenly, it roared in fury, lowering its head and locking its gaze onto a group of fleeing figures. Those figures were clearly from the Divine Hall. With the Lord of the Divine Hall absent, it was clear that the Earth Supremes had no intention of diverting their attention to rescue them. Leading the Divine Hall forces were the 4 Pavilion Masters, and when they realized the spirit puppet was directing its furious gaze toward them, their scalps went numb with fear. Although the 4 of them were the top-tier experts in the Divine Hall, just below the Lord of the Divine Hall, facing a spirit puppet that even the 6 Earth Supremes couldn't deal with, they felt as fragile as ants. The spirit puppet's hollow eyes flashed with brilliance, and in the next moment, it struck fiercely. 1,000 rays of light surged from its palm, resembling the dragon binding rope, and instantly appeared above the many people of the Divine Pavilion. The light then swept downward. With terrifying force, and the immense pressure froze the surrounding space that it completely trapped all the members of the Divine Pavilion in the void. Faced with the spirit puppet's attack, the 4 Pavilion Masters of the Divine Pavilion turned pale, unleashing all their spiritual energy without reserve. Yet, even so, they could not shift the strands of light that fell from above. The gap between them and the Earth Supreme was far too vast. The people from the great Luo heaven domain, who had been taken away by Mandala, witnessed this scene from afar and couldn't help but click their tongues in astonishment. The spirit puppet was terrifying to such an extent that with a mere casual strike, it had forced the luxurious formation of the divine pavilion into a deadly situation. Boom! Just as everyone thought the members of the divine pavilion were doomed, the ocean below suddenly roared to life. Towering waves surged up, and a rainbow light shot out from it, forming a light barrier that enveloped the people of the divine pavilion. Bang! Bang! The rays of light hammered fiercely against the barrier, and the sound of thunder rang out, rippling the surface. Yet, the light barrier did not shatter. Instead, it swiftly carried the members of the divine pavilion away, vanishing in an instant, appearing tens of thousands of feet away. Having narrowly escaped death, even the 4 pavilion masters of the divine pavilion felt their legs weaken, their backs soaked in cold sweat. Before them, the space rippled, and a figure stepped out from the void. With hands clasped behind his back, he stood tall, his overwhelming aura shaking even the heavens and earth. This figure, of course, was the Lord of the Divine Pavilion. "Thank you for saving us, Pavilion Master." The members of the Divine Pavilion immediately bowed in reverence upon seeing this imposing figure. What a pity! The kings of the great Luo heaven domain, upon witnessing this scene, couldn't help but shake their heads in regret. In the end, the Lord of the Divine Pavilion had intervened at this crucial moment. Mandala's golden eyes narrowed slightly as she observed the Lord of the Divine Pavilion. He appeared exactly as he had before, and the fluctuations of his spiritual energy were extremely calm. The injuries caused by his earlier confrontation with the spirit puppet seemed to have fully healed. This guy, however, for some reason, Mandala furrowed her brows, sensing that something was off, though she couldn't pinpoint exactly what. She shook her head and refocused her mind on the most important matter at hand. Her golden eyes turned to Chen and the others, and she asked, "What about the divine spirit liquid? Who obtained it?" Even with Mandala's composure, a ripple of excitement flickered in her eyes when the divine spirit liquid was mentioned. Clearly, she placed great importance on it. The 3 emperors exchanged a glance, then smiled before looking toward Chen. Chen flipped his hand, and the ancient clay pot appeared in his palm. Golden light erupted from it, and the sky was immediately bathed in golden rays that a stream of golden light slowly rose from the BTTH. This moment, the 3 emperors and 9 nether were finally able to clearly see the form of the divine spirit liquid Chen had condensed. To their surprise, the divine spirit liquid was not in a liquid form at all. Within the golden light, the golden rays condensed into a palm-sized golden fetus. The fetus was covered in extremely ancient runes, faintly pulsating as if it were alive. As soon as this object appeared, 9 nether and the others could distinctly feel the spiritual energy in the surrounding world become thick and viscous. They took a deep breath, and even their own spiritual energy surged rapidly. Such a terrifying concentration of spiritual energy essence was something even figures like the Sleeping King would not dare to absorb lightly. To them, haphazardly absorbing it would be like ingesting poison. The divine spirit liquid is actually like this? 9 nether and the others couldn't help but exclaim in amazement. It's actually perfect grade divine spirit liquid. When the golden fetus-like divine spirit liquid appeared, Mandala's golden eyes widened in shock. The look of astonishment crossed her face as she murmured, "No wonder." Over the years, during the Great Hunting War in the Northern Domain, although the divine spirit liquid had appeared several times, it had never been in large quantities. There were only a handful of perfect-grade divine spirit liquids. She never expected that Chen and the others would bring her such a precious item from the Stone Island. The Sleeping King, seeing Mandala's stunned expression, smiled slightly and said, "Thanks to Chen this time, that if he hadn't obtained the best refining essence and also managed to hold off the Southern Pavilion Master on his own, we'd probably only have gotten an ordinary divine spirit liquid." Mandala snapped out of her daze, casting a deep glance at Chen. "I'll remember this." She didn't say much, just a simple sentence, but Chen, who understood her character well, knew exactly what it meant. From this single phrase, it was clear that Mandala did not see him as a true subordinate. After all, if someone like the Xun'er king had done the same, she might have rewarded them with great merit. But for Mu Chen, she made no promises. Perhaps from the very beginning, her interactions with him were on equal footing. Despite Mu Chen's abilities, they were still far apart in power. Mu Chen smiled at Mandala without saying anything dramatic. With a flick of his finger, he sent the golden, fetus-like, divine spirit liquid towards her. Mandala extended her pale hand and gently grasped the divine spirit liquid. As she did, she could distinctly feel waves of envious gazes coming from afar. Those gazes came from other Earth Supremes, who had clearly sensed the terrifying power contained in Mandala's divine spirit liquid. While the great Luo heaven domain was filled with celebration, the many people of the divine hall fell silent. Before them, the Lord of the divine hall held a golden pill-like object, a divine spirit liquid they had condensed, but compared to the one in Mandala's hands, it was clearly of an inferior grade. Pavilion Master, it's that kid, Mu Chen, who has ruined everything for us. The Southern Pavilion Master ground his teeth in anger. Mu Chen, huh? The Lord of the Divine Hall narrowed his eyes, then gave a faint smile. It doesn't matter. Even if Mandala has acquired a perfect grade divine spirit liquid, that doesn't necessarily mean she can break through. I am already ahead of her in this regard. Do you want to compare and see who breaks through to the Upper Earth Supreme first? A cold smile curled up at the corners of the Divine Hall Lord's lips, eye in his eyes. A flame of ambition seemed to burn. He chuckled softly and muttered, "From now on, I will be the true overlord of the Northern Domain." As he finished speaking, he wasted no time. He swallowed the golden pill in one go, and with a wave of his sleeve, a terrifying surge of spiritual energy erupted, forming a light barrier that enveloped all the powerful figures in the Divine Hall. Under this protection, he sat cross-legged in midair. At the same time, other leaders of the factions who had obtained divine spirit liquid also looked at each other, their eyes flickering, before they too swallowed their divine spirit liquids. "Protect me." Mandala uttered a soft command without hesitation. She parted her lips slightly and swallowed the golden, fetus-like divine spirit liquid. A burst of golden light erupted, enveloping her body. Mu Chen and the others stood behind her, gazing into the distance. In the 6 directions ahead, dazzling light surged. Clearly, the other 6 Earth Supremes had also chosen this moment to use the divine spirit liquid to break through. Once they succeeded, the entire Northern Domain would be thrown into turmoil. Everyone's hearts tightened. This grand hunting war, after all this time, was finally at the critical moment that would determine who would live and who would die. Mu Chen exchanged a glance with the 9 Nether, their expressions turning grim. If the Lord of the Divine Hall were to break through, then the great Luo Heaven Domain might soon become a doomed force. 7 streams of magnificent light enveloped the space, and a terrifying aura of spiritual energy pressure emanated from them. It was as though the very fabric of space was cracking under the immense strain. As the 6 Earth Supremes continued their cultivation, the oppressive force from their bodies grew stronger. Eventually, they could no longer suppress it, causing the pressure to spread out uncontrollably. This forced the powerful figures in the vicinity to retreat tens of thousands of meters. At this moment, the other powerful figures no longer had the desire to fight among themselves. All their focus was on the 7 streams of magnificent light. They knew that at this point, their struggles no longer mattered. The true battle that would decide the Northern Domain's fate lay in the hands of these 7 true top-tier powerhouses. The kings of the great Luo Heaven Domain exchanged looks, each seeing the same nervousness in the other's eyes. Even someone as composed as Mu Chen felt a bead of sweat form on his palm. In this kind of high-stakes competition, if Mandala made a mistake, they might face total destruction. If she failed, they would all become lost, like stray dogs. At that point, their only option might be to escape the Northern Domain and find a new place to cultivate. This was clearly not the situation Mu Chen had envisioned. He had come to the Northern Realm with the ultimate goal of finding the ancient heavenly palace and further advancing the evolution of the eternal undying body. However, such a competition was incredibly difficult for him to achieve alone. Therefore, he had to rely on the power of the great Luo Heaven Domain. If the Divine Pavilion were to destroy the great Luo Heaven Domain, all of his efforts over the past 2 years would go to waste. Mu Chen's gaze remained fixed on the distant violet glow. His hand involuntarily tightened into a fist. "Mandala, you must succeed." Buzz. Just as Mu Chen whispered these words to himself, suddenly, from the twisted heavens and earth, a colossal rainbow light shot up to the sky, spanning tens of thousands of zhang. The rainbow light resembled a towering pillar, seemingly piercing through the very fabric of space itself. This unexpected change immediately caused Mu Chen and the others to react, their faces changing as they hurriedly infused their spiritual energy into their eyes. Focusing intently, they saw within the massive rainbow light a figure seated cross-legged in a starry white robe. Spiritual energy, like a tidal wave, gathered behind him, and faintly, the sound of crashing waves could be heard. It's the ancestor of myriad sacred from 10,000 Saints Mountain. The spirit pupil emperor's eyes gleamed with light, piercing through the spiritual energy tidal wave to clearly identify the figure. He immediately spoke in a deep voice. "His strength has advanced, but it seems he hasn't yet broken through." The sleeping king continued. "The ancestor of myriad sacred has made progress by using the power of spiritual divine liquid, but it's clear he still hasn't reached the level of an upper earth supreme." Hearing this, Mu Chen and the others sighed in relief. Although the great Luo Heaven Domain and 10,000 Saints Mountain had little conflict, breaking the balance in such a time could lead to unpredictable outcomes. Soon after the ancestor of myriad sacred completed his cultivation, more towering rainbow lights shot into the sky. Each light carried a figure standing with their hands clasped behind their back, and the terrifying aura they exuded made the very spiritual energy of the world tremble. That's Lu Tiandao from Xintian Palace. His strength has also grown considerably. And the demon emperor from the demon gate, the old serpent ghost from the serpent god temple, the lord of the netherworld palace from the netherworld palace. They have all absorbed and refined their respective spiritual divine liquids. While their power has increased, none of them have broken through. Mu Chen and the others' gazes flickered rapidly, and they were secretly shocked. They hadn't expected the upper Earth Supreme level to be so hard to break through. The 5 Earth Supremes had all failed to advance. Far in the distant heavens and earth, the 5 Earth Supremes furrowed their brows, clearly displeased with their own failure. However, they could do nothing about it. Between each level of Earth Supreme, there was a vast difference, and it was not something that could be easily bridged. Now that the 5 Earth Supremes have completed their cultivation, the next ones to focus on are the great Luo Domain Master and the Lord of the Divine Pavilion. The powerful figures of various forces across the world couldn't help but cast their gazes toward the 2 bright rays of light in the heavens. Even the 5 Earth Supremes, who had just completed their training, wore solemn expressions that in their hearts. They all knew that, among the 7 of them, the 2 most likely to break through were the Lord of the Divine Pavilion and the great Luo Domain Master. The former was already close to the level of an upper Earth Supreme, while the latter possessed a perfect grade spiritual divine liquid, which gave him a high chance of breaking through. It was clear that no matter who eventually broke through to become an upper Earth Supreme, the power structure in the Northern Realm would change because of As various forces waited anxiously in the heavens and earth. Movements finally began. In the area where Mandala and the Lord of the Divine Pavilion were located, suddenly, a thunderous sound echoed from within the 2 rays of light. It wasn't true thunder, but the sound created by the friction of spiritual energy, a thunderous noise that shook the heavens. The sound waves rippled outward, causing spiritual energy to explode. Instantly, the heavens and earth shook with a continuous rumble, even making the distant strong warrior's blood boil and causing blood to seep from their skin. This commotion also caused various forces to look on with uncertain expressions. They could clearly tell that the momentum of Mandala and the Lord of the Divine Pavilion seemed even stronger than the 5 Earth Supremes before them. Could it be that the 2 of them have broken through to become upper Earth Supremes? The powerful figures from all sides exchanged glances, and soon their eyes turned toward the 5 Earth Supremes in the sky. When they saw that although their expressions were solemn, their faces had not truly changed, they finally let out a quiet sigh of relief. If Mandala and the Lord of the Divine Pavilion had truly broken through, it was likely that the 5 Earth Supremes wouldn't be so calm. Boom! The rumbling from the heavens and earth grew more intense, reaching a point where it sounded like mountains and seas collapsing, leaving everyone in shock. As the thunderous roar reached its peak, suddenly, torrential rain began to pour down from the sky. This was no ordinary rain, but rain formed entirely from spiritual energy, cascading down in a deafening roar. Chen and the others watched this phenomenon of the world in awe, unable to hold back their astonishment. Is this the power of an Earth Supreme? Just by cultivating at this level, one could cause such a dramatic shift in the world's weather. It was truly hard to believe. Whoosh! The spiritual rain fell in a vast and overwhelming downpour, but it wasn't wasted. Halfway through its descent, it rapidly gathered into columns of spiritual energy, eventually merging into 2 beams of light. Within the light beams, 2 figures could be vaguely seen, their mouths slightly open as if like giant whales sucking in water, absorbing the pure spiritual energy columns entirely. They absorbed the energy for a full 10 minutes, and only then did the bizarre phenomena in the sky begin to slowly fade. The endless radiance also started to retract, and as it finally dispersed, the 2 figures appeared clearly before the eyes of the onlookers. Mandala remained in her black gown, her petite figure carrying none of the domineering aura that an Earth Supreme might have, yet her golden eyes seemed even deeper, and her fair, bare feet stood firm in stillness. She was like a stone that could calm the heavens, bringing everything into quiet submission. Elsewhere, the Lord of the Divine Pavilion stood in white robes. Though his appearance was ordinary and imposing, aura emanated from him, subtly making all things bow in submission. The 2 figures hovered in midair, their gazes seemingly clashing in that moment. The very space where their eyes met was suddenly torn apart, and below, the ocean was shattered into pieces. Behind them, torrents of spiritual energy surged, within which the faintest traces of mountains and rivers seemed to appear, mystifying beyond belief. Spiritual energy transforming into mountains and rivers. When the 5 Earth Supremes, including the ancestor of myriad sacred, saw the mountains and rivers formed from spiritual energy behind Mandala and the Lord of the Divine Pavilion, their pupils contracted. Such a phenomenon could only occur when one's spiritual energy resonated with that of the world, an ability reached only by those at the level of a higher Earth Supreme. But now, Mandala and the Lord of the Divine Pavilion clearly didn't carry the overwhelming pressure of true higher Earth Supremes. So, the only conclusion was that both had reached the level of a half-step higher Earth Supreme. To put it simply, Mandala and the Lord of the Divine Pavilion had reached the threshold of the higher Earth Supreme. They were now only a half-step away from fully attaining it. Though it seemed like only half a step, the 5 Earth Supremes from the Netherworld Palace knew that if they were to fight one-on-one at this moment, they would stand no chance against either Mandala or the Lord of the Divine Pavilion. Half-step higher Earth Supreme, huh? Chen and the others gazed at this scene and quietly sighed in relief. While Mandala had not broken through to become a higher Earth Supreme, this result was still unexpected. She had certainly not fallen behind the Lord of the Divine Pavilion. With this, it was clear that the Divine Pavilion's goal of annihilating their great Luo Heaven domain was nothing but a dream. The great Luo domain master is truly exceptional, able to catch up even when lagging behind, the Lord of the Divine Pavilion said, sensing his own condition before smiling faintly. Mandala, her golden eyes indifferent, glanced at him but said nothing. The Lord of the Divine Pavilion, unfazed by her response, shifted his gaze to the other 5 Earth Supremes, a profound smile appearing on his ordinary face. He then spoke. 5. I have a suggestion. I wonder if you are interested? Upon hearing this, the 5 Earth Supremes narrowed their eyes, their hearts skipping a beat. What was the Lord of the Divine Pavilion planning now? What does the Lord of the Divine Pavilion want? The ancestor of myriad sacred asked in a deep voice. The Lord of the Divine Pavilion smiled slightly, and though his expression seemed gentle, an undeniable aura of dominance surged from him, his voice thundering like a storm through the space around them. The northern domain has been separated for too long. Today, I wish to unite it, gather strength, and let our northern domain truly rise on this Tianluo continent. This grand cause, would the 5 of you be willing to support me?" When the powerful voice of the Lord of the Divine Pavilion rang out, not only did the powerful figures from all sides show expressions of shock, but even the 5 Earth Supremes couldn't help but change their expressions. This Lord of the Divine Pavilion had clearly not broken through to the upper Earth Supreme level, and beside him was the great Luo Domain Master, who had also stepped into the half-step upper Earth Supreme realm, eyeing him with great caution. Yet, he dared to openly declare his intent to unify the northern domain. Where did his confidence come from?